Takkinen asks, is sustainability dead? This is what got us excited. So we were very excited to come across this paper called Post-Sustainability, a Hermeneutic Literature Review. We came across it a few days after it was published, first published 17th May 2025, so not long ago. It looks at the concept of post-sustainability and tries to understand exactly what is this thing that is going on in scholarly work. So this is the first ever literature review surveying meanings of post-sustainability in 116 scholarly texts, alongside a thematic classification of post-sustainability themes, so suggesting a general characterization, essentially, in this paper. And this paper describes this tension between the implausibility of the sustainability paradigm and the seemingly impossibility to deal with the future eco-social predicaments such as the Anthropocene. Post-sustainability is stimulating self-reflection within a range of scholarly fields by raising timely questions. Is sustainability behind us? If so, what should be done about it? Future conceptualizations of post-sustainability are then suggested in this paper to take into account the plural meanings of the prefix post and the demarcation between post and anti-sustainability positions. This paper is written by Finnish researcher Pasi Takkinen, and we are so delighted to be able to speak with him about his research, his interest in this area, and of course, his paper. Before we get into that, let's just give some highlights around the classifications that are identified by Takkinen in his analysis of post-sustainability literature. The classifications are critical post-colonial and post-developmental discourse that questions global sustainable development policies, post-enlightenment understanding of culture and the human condition in a post-fossil and post-equilibrium world, critical analysis of sustainability as sustained unsustainability, moving away from sustainability to quick transition, resilience, and societal collapse due to the Anthropocene realities, the narrowing of possibilities in sustainability policy, addressing current views on technology, resource use, and economy, and questioning if they are beneficial, justified, and resilient in the post-sustainable era. The collapse of sustainability as future horizon challenges human understanding and mental well-being, leading to epistemic humility, existential uncertainty, emotional anxiety, and spiritual or theological reflection. Failure of scholarly discourse, scientific knowledge production, the role of academia and educational institutions in relation to sustainability, and calls for a more radical, transformative, or regenerative focus and connecting with nature, which means moving away from anthropocentrism and a mechanistic view of sustainability.
This video might feel like a lot. Some of the thought jumps might feel like they come out of nowhere, especially if this is your first encounter with the idea that sustainability, as it's sold today, is deeply colonial. If that is you, you are not alone. It's a lot to sit with. These aren't easy ideas because they poke at things many of us were taught to believe in, build careers around, or even shape our sense of identity. So if you feel confused, challenged, skeptical, curious, or even a little activated, that's okay. That's part of what this work stirs up. Stick around anyway. Let your curiosity do what curiosity does. We are not offering all the answers, but we are inviting you to ask different questions. We will keep exploring and unpacking these ideas together in future videos.
Possible Futures speaks to Pasi Takkinen about his paper, Post-Sustainability, a Hermeneutic Literature Review.
To start, I think it would be awesome to hear more about
your background, your context, what you have been researching, and what led you to these explorations within the field of sustainability.
Okay, thank you. So my background is that I'm a philosopher by education. So I did my master's degree in philosophy, and then I was very interested and concerned about environmental and sustainability issues. So I had been also studying environmental philosophy and such. But then when I wanted to pursuing my PhD, I found out that actually the question of education and sustainability seemed very critical and concerning. I already then started to find literature that was concerned, what if sustainability doesn't work? What if it doesn't deliver, so to say, some kind of safe and predictable future? So what does this then mean for the education? So I went to did my PhD on that topic. I found a wonderful professor who has written about it. And since then, last 5 years, I have been studying this topic of education in the post-sustainable era. And I'm just wrapping up my PhD as we speak. And yeah, it has been an interesting journey, but I must say that I have more questions than answers because I think education is so, I don't know, it's so fragile. Because if you think that sustainability doesn't work, then it can be considered as a problem or technical question. But when it's about educating young people in this world and having to say that sustainability doesn't necessarily work, by the way, then it's a challenge. And I have been describing it as an epistemic imbalance in education, so imbalance of knowing, because educational systems can today, of course, say that what is the situation with environmental crisis or planetary boundaries. So it's very scientific and accurate or reliable even. But then when we should discuss about what should we do about it, or what will follow, or what will the world be in 30 years or something, there is uncertainty in the side of education. So in this sense, there is this like epistemic imbalance of knowing, and it will cause, of course, huge amounts of uncertainty, of course, for those to be educated. There was this school strikes for climate, for example, started in Nordic countries and from Sweden, that mobilized millions of young people. So I would guess it somehow relates to that problem that the adults or us or the current societies are creating problems and they have no answers for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's super interesting also how you brought up education and how the younger generations will interact with this thing, because in a way, sustainability in its purpose and good intentions, like the intention of sustainability to stay within the planetary boundaries, etc., is important, but the way that it has been practiced, as you said, like it's not changing or doesn't seem to be working. So I would love to hear more around your perspectives and also your opinion on this practice of post-sustainability. What does that mean? Also in practice, as you were saying, through these practical examples beyond academic, also bringing some of what you found out in doing this research, but also a little bit of your perspectives on it.
From your comment, I got this idea that I have also been formulating education such that in education, society actually shows its true like future commitments, how to educate young people. And many scholars who articulate this post-sustainable education, they are saying that at the moment education is instrumental and serving like neoliberal agenda or the economic competitiveness of our societies, and are preparing new generations for that kind of future. So some scholars say that that's very irresponsible, and educators should not commit to that, but instead be honest about their views of sustainability. So in that sense, like education is the focal point where community currently shows its true commitments, and it's a bit concerning. And so then about post-sustainable practice, right? It's a tough question because writing this literature review, I feel like a generalist and like a philosopher. So I am reading and writing like how many fields report their like uncertainties, or maybe this kind of scientific revision what different fields should be. But what would then be like post-sustainable practice? I think much can be read from the article and different articulations in my review. For example, I think like degrowth thinking and practice, whatever that might be.
You mentioned education that is aligned with this neoliberal economic agenda. And I
Yeah,
think for us, this is how we interpret what is happening in business schools and how sustainability is taught immediately entering into the sustainability industry. What's your opinions on this? Because there's a fundamental ideology that is embedded into sustainability education that is, as you said, incompatible with planetary boundaries.
yeah, absolutely. And a wonderful question. Thank you. So I have been using in my research the term lack of autonomy. So researchers who report or articulate these concerns, they report some kind of lack of autonomy in their institution and in the commitments, for example, the institution or curriculum in the school, like structural or this institutional views of sustainability. And it's hard to pinpoint where that lack of autonomy or hegemony comes from. It's like felt, it's in the discourse, it's generated spontaneously in our culture. For example, I think, and behind this, for example, this economic push is another question, that is question of technology and technological optimism. And it's also another topic that is very like embedded in our cultural fabric, that uh, new technologies will be invented that will solve the sustainability problems. And of course, that kind of belief then justifies the economic growth, because you cannot have a new kind of invention and new applications without economic growth. So in that sense, growth economy go hand in hand with technological optimism. And they are also very difficult to argue against or somehow falsify, even if there is recent research on, for example, decoupling. So decoupling ecological harms from economic growth. And I think that's one of the central arguments and central questions justifying the current business as usual. And in recent years, there have been lots of research that it's not actually happening. It's like empirically and scientifically not happening, or not happening fast enough. So it's politically like irresponsible to rely on that kind of sustainability visions. And still, it's like in the media and in common discourse, how we talk in everyday life, that belief is in there. So I think also in educational system and this business schools kind of education, it's like it doesn't need to like fabricate this kind of justification because it's already so deep inside the culture. So, and that's where the lack of autonomy also derives from. There needs to be critical and scientific and rational discussion about it, but I also feel that when the crises will worsen, for example, also in global north and so-called welfare societies or whatever, then there may be more criticism, but also because if things worsen, there will be more fierce technological optimism, like even more salvatory visions. So I don't know if I see signs of this situation improving, so to say.
Yeah, and as you say, this decoupling was first proposed on a global level in the late 80s with the Brundtland Report. So this is not a new concept that we're kind of like just realizing. This is like decades. And so when you're talking about this lack of autonomy or kind of like systemic barriers and referring to it as a cultural phenomenon, I think this is very much what we see as part of how, when the system is critiqued, it rejects, right? It's just as though the body is rejecting an organ, and it's just the entire body. It's the entire immune system that's attacking this thing. And so from this cutting off support and then like rejection of the chemical processes of this thing, that's I think how it feels. It doesn't, as you say, it doesn't come from one place. It doesn't come from a set number of places. It's just the entire thing that is just all out on rejecting this critique.
Yeah,
Very dangerous, as you said. This is a anti-scientific approach, and it brings very concerning questions around culturally. Why are we baking in? It feels almost intentional, especially the way that you're describing it so clearly, this uncertainty within the education space. And for us, we know in civilizational power dynamics, uncertainty is used as a way to advance the elite conceptualizations of the future. From our perspective, from a decolonial perspective, we see this as a necessity. The systemic uncertainty is a necessity for colonial hegemony to dictate the future in a world that is changing on a scale that we have not seen because of planetary systems collapse. So it's a way to steal the advantage from essentially what we're seeing over the next 30, 40 years. So I think this brings us to the question, is sustainability then actually collapsing? As a narrative, as an industry, does this emergence of post-sustainability or the rising, let's say, popularity of the philosophy of post-sustainability, does that mean that sustainability itself is actually collapsing?
yeah, that's a relevant question, and I think in some ways, of course, and from some points of view, we can say that, for example, sustainability has failed, as we can see from the past decades, or that it will like collapse as some kind of paradigm. I think it will remain, however, as a concept in public discourse. And very recently, uh, at the same time as this article was published, three Finnish philosophers published a book of philosophy of sustainability, and it's like 400 pages of elaboration of what sustainability is, because of course it is not a simple definition, like what it actually means, what it could mean in this at this particular moment. And of course they say that we should keep the concept, but like fight for it, and fight for a proper definition that is not distorted by false agendas and that kind of things. And I of course understand that point, that maybe there needs to be some kind of anchoring or ethical concept that people can relate to. But I think in critical or scholarly discussion, this post-sustainability is very much like called for, and as we see, like it's starting to be very much in use. And also the concept like strong sustainability, degrowth, regenerative sustainability can be seen in a way already like a post-sustainable concept. As concept, they are something better or like more profound than the original formulations. So I think at least there will be those two, like maybe scholars and other people researching what will come next. And in my literature, many articulate, and in this kind of approach, sustainability is no more necessary concept. Of course, it's something to root to historically, but in that view, sustainability is no more something that lies in the future, but it's more like a lost opportunity in history, and we or somebody failed that. And of course, I don't know about how the public use or definition turns out, because I also believe that sustainability seems to be like hopelessly contested at the moment. It means too much and too little at the same time. But of course, when we see today the emergence of all kind of denialism and anti-sustainability views, that's why I also in my paper reminded that we should have clear demarcation for that, because if we declare that sustainability doesn't know what it's doing, then certain, I would say, wrong people get excited about that and may use that in some kind of denialist thing, as we saw in climate discourse. I don't know, what's your view on those thoughts?
I see the foundational ideology of sustainability, as we were describing, as part of this green capitalism, green growth, still present within the discourse in degrowth, in regeneration, etc. Because I think I see it as part of the next evolution of coloniality. I see it as a way to maintain control on the world order. And my evidence for it is looking at how the military-industrial complex insists on upholding this ideology of what sustainability is. When you have Western military power, which, by the way, was only built by stolen wealth from the global South, when you have that kind of power that is asserting a certain kind of sustainability, it tells you something about the intentions for the future that I think are in play when we're looking at, this neoliberal agenda that's being applied in the education space. So for me, all these things are very connected. I see them as part of a colonial power grab, because it's very convenient, right? In the time of crisis, that you can just basically reach out and grab everything and solidify your position as the one who dictates. In many ways, I feel like the UN apparatus has been used for doing that for a long time. On the one hand, the West has created chaos across the global South in order to do this on small scales, on country level scales. And then now here's this opportunity, right, with planetary systems collapse, to do that on a global scale. And the sustainability industry is a highly, highly coordinated machine, right, that is so baked into this propaganda that it rejects critique, it rejects everything else, it rejects science, even, the scientific method. And so when you're seeing it from this perspective, I think it's very difficult, as you say, like, for us, sustainability has collapsed a long time ago. It's just kind of like coasting on this veneer, this act of justice, which is a performative, surface, superficial thing with no substance, no reality, no, it's not even like we don't even see it as relevant on planet Earth, you know? When Western science itself is also ignoring their own conceptualizations of planetary boundaries. Again, it's the same. There are so many independent researchers and scientists who are disputing what is the official line from the Potsdam Institute and others. That official line, they say, is fabricated because those boundaries have been long passed. And these are from, again, independent researchers who have been shunned, right? Part of the reject mechanism that over the decades has led to them essentially needing to self-fund in order to get their research out there. When we're looking at all the things that inform sustainability, right? In itself, I think that has a questionable ideology, a questionable morality. It's built upon systems that have already been very effective at rejecting critique. And the propaganda is extremely, extremely organized.
Sustainability, as well as the mainstream sustainability discourse and industry, together with other things that you also brought up, like this techno-optimism, hopium, this for me seems like all strategies to maintain colonial power structures by promising salvation from within the same structure. It is a way of comforting colonial power by framing collapse as an opportunity for the same dominant actors to innovate, profit, and save the world from the problems that most of times themselves created, themselves, I mean, the same system, rather than to reckon with the violence and the future irrelevance as collapse accelerates. So for me, it's a kind of way to mask the need for a more structural transformation, as Samantha was saying, like where these narratives, where these approaches that sustainability uses come from, that is part of the same problem that it's trying to solve. So it enters in a kind of endless loop. And I think I was thinking also to what you brought up about education, because I think it is also a loop there, because nowadays education prepares people for making a living, right? Like this is the main objective, you can say. So it's kind of training people to enter the industry in a way that they can make money. So it kind of feeds from what is current in the industry. And then the industry, it's like an endless, it's the monster feeding itself almost, like, because people enter in the professional sphere already trained to act certain ways or use certain frameworks, or like this thing becomes very hard to challenge. And I think it enters in this lack of autonomy, lack of agency that people experience because they are constrained by a series of mechanisms that in the industry that are designed to make that very hard to challenge and to change. So I think these are some of the things we also bring in the colonial sustainability paper, like kind of tracing how this thing evolved from the past, like what are the mechanisms, the narratives that are still present today, and that were so efficient that they persist the centuries, like they shape shift, they evolve, right, to keep up with time. So this is kind of how we see why sustainability in industry is not working and why it's dead. You have been through this literature review kind of surfacing a lot of perspectives from this, like why is sustainability not working, what is this post-sustainability, and then bringing up as you said, degrowth or regenerative approaches. Like there are different ways to define what post-sustainability is. And I would love to hear about what do you see around the perspectives included in the literature review? Like how much of it is from Global North? Are there perspectives from Global South? Like what are the different interpretations and perceptions around this theme?
Thank you, Anna. First, I would like to comment that we were talking about this power structure that legitimizes itself through crisis. Like I remember one historian of technology said that this technocratic and technological optimism, it was some kind of doll that has weight in the bottom. And every time you push it down, it bounces back up. So I think it has been and it will be like that also in the future. But and also like what Samantha you said about this changing of titles of this same system, like it sheds its skin or changes its clothes, and it's again like legitimate after that. Because my paper was framed as hermeneutic review, so I think here hermeneutics is relevant. It's not because it's not looking how something is defined or defined in some text or that kind of announcement, for example, but it's looking at how it actually works, what it actually does in this world and in the culture and in the nature. So post-sustainability is yet again one attempt to look behind that like skin or the title. And to Anna's question, it was interesting to note that the first articulations of post-sustainability in the 2000 were actually post-colonial or decolonial articulations, because it first means like post-sustainable development, and it was continuation of the post-development discourse that was going on in the post-war world after the Second World War. And when the sustainable development was then introduced, some scholars, for example, in this review, Michael Redcliffe and others, say that actually it's the same thing. It's not so the discourse was not anymore post-development, but now it was post-sustainable development. So it was one way of interpreting that it's actually the same thing. So that was the beginning. But then after that, and I read the literature like chronologically, what happened then. And then I saw that it came to be, post-sustainability became to be like some kind of realization in global north societies that actually these crises are at some point sooner or later gonna destabilize our societies, and are we prepared for that? So it became a question of environmental management and policy and stuff like that. So like waking up like here in global north, so to say, and in affluent societies. Then, of course, after that, it became also articulated as crisis of science, like sustainability science. And it was articulated that it relies too much, for example, technical innovation and market instruments. It was described as like even a paradigm crisis in science, where what is actually happening cannot be explained by the current theories. So they're called anomalies. And if the whole ecological crisis is an anomaly, because if we have the best science and technology at the moment, why are environmental crises worsening? So it's a big anomaly. And then from that scientific crisis, some authors interpreted that it is rooted to deeper cultural epistemology, worldview, how we explain humans and world and this. So in a sense, it became from post-colonial and decolonial discourse, but now I would say like it's more like internal diagnosis of like affluent societies and this kind of sustainability science. And maybe, I don't know if it's right to say that it's somehow solipsistic or staying inside of like North perspective that feels threatened now because things doesn't look so well anymore. But one scholar, John Foster, who is a philosopher, has, I think, very convincingly said that we should see this post-sustainability not a problem to be solved, but as a tragedy, in the original sense of tragedy, that there is going to be loss and it has to be accepted in a way. And also, he means by tragedy that if there is some like hero of the story, then that hero's lethal weaknesses are also included in the hero's strengths. So, for example, I might think that this kind of scientific technical capacity to expand and exploit and extract, they are strengths in some way. If we look at world history and environmental history, it's some kind of strength. But it seems to be also the weakness. And for example, if we should ask, can it be stopped before it's too late? Then it seems to also be the weakness to rely on that same logic. So I think Foster is in this sense convincing if we see post-sustainability as some kind of cultural, some kind of awakening in affluent and stable societies. It reminds me of, again, the role of technology. As Anna said, salvation, like this kind of sustainability, is a salvation promised by the same dominant system that uses this technology. And if we link that to the Foster's point of tragedy, then it's so convenient that the same like technological economic extractivism that created these problems, it's very convenient that now actually it can be solved through the same mechanism. But then we can think like, I don't know, more philosophically, that take away the technological promise, then what does modern society have to offer in these crises? Like, do we have a way to create some democratic consensus of saving the planet or creating cultural transformation or enjoying quality of life in non-affluent environments? We don't seem to have that knowledge. The only card in the sleeve, so to say, is technology. I might refer to this Finnish philosopher Tere Vaden, who has like said that what is sustainability expertise for? We could say that it's for keeping to inhabit this planet. And if we say it's some knowledge that helps us to inhabit this planet, it doesn't yet have any assumptions of what should be sustained, should we have modern society or whatever. So it's quite neutral way to put it. And then Baden says that the first note to make should be that in the history of modern and fossil-fueled culture, there is no single example of sustainability, not even a small scale or momentary example. But from historical and anthropological and other views, we can say that there are examples of sustainable cultures that are non-modern or fossil-fueled and so forth. So I think that should be some kind of very abstract and philosophical starting point of asking what are sustainability experts for and who are they and what kind of knowledge they represent.
Yeah, I think what you brought up about the collapse in the modern society, we in the collective see the collapse among many things, but the collapse of the modern Western civilization as it was built on this paradigm of extraction, of colonialism, and sustainability industry being part of that, also collapsing. But I think it is interesting when we think about the post-sustainability and what it means and what are the perspectives that are defining that. If post-sustainability is just like sustainability on steroids or like the evolution of this thing, because in the paper we talk about the cultural evolution of coloniality, and I think in a way you can think about this cultural evolution of sustainability in the same way. So is post-sustainability just the improvement of the sustainability narrative, keeping its structures and just doing this iterative change, or is this something else entirely? Because I think, for example, when you mentioned one of the ways to look at this is the regenerative paradigm or approaches, which a lot of people in the industry now like kind of see regeneration as the next thing. But even the way regeneration is presented in that graphic of sustainable, and then you have sustainability, and then you have regeneration, which is something that doesn't just want to sustain life, but wants to regenerate. It's kind of the evolution, the linear evolution of the thing. So I think it is interesting to think about where these ideas are coming from and what perspectives they are bringing.
Yeah, so that's actually very good to come to that question, what does post-sustainability actually mean? Because in this review, I didn't want to make too strict definition, but I merely wanted to describe, not to define, describe how it's used. And I found this like three ways of using it. First is like that post-sustainability means simply failed sustainability. And in that sense, you could say that temporarily it's in history. It was a possibility, maybe at some point, but it was failed. And that involves all kinds of critiques of why it failed. For example, technological optimism or economic growth or such things. And in this category, I think this critical analysis, for example, was relevant, the one presented by Bludorn in my literature. He said, like in ironical tone, that sustainability is very successful in keeping up the unsustainability of global north. It's like the social contract that we like tap ourselves in shoulder and say, yeah, we are sustainable, and keep doing the same. And Bludon states that before starting to producing or fabricating new narratives of hope, we should very strictly research what is this sustained unsustainability and how it works and how we can avoid it. So this is I think one way of seeing it as a temporal past and failed sustainability. Then another, post-sustainability as a bleak future, like future of the Anthropocene, polycrisis, and ecological crisis. If I just talk about this critical and temporarily past sustainability as failure, it's more like social and cultural studies and critical studies, critical research attitude. Then this future-oriented, like this bleak future view, is more like science-based of these planetary boundaries and other more natural scientifically modeled visions. And then the question is, how can we live in that kind of future? How can different kind of societies and ways of life exist in that kind of future? And it's another question. And then I think the third way to use the term post-sustainability is like the current moment realization that we are in between these the sustainability that is no more plausible and bleak future that seems impossible in existential and other ways. And this post-sustainability in this last sense would mean very critical revision of what we are doing. And by we, I mean, for example, different fields. For example, field of education or urban planning in some of my literature, or even like crisis management or that kind of conflict studies. So it's like this revisionist view of post-sustainability is like asking, where are we now? Are we maybe mistaken in some relevant way? And should we consider again the basic knowledge or assumptions in our research fields? The concept post-sustainability does all of that work, and then it can be positioned or discussed again, which of these we are talking. Yeah.
As Anna was saying, we view decolonial sustainability in our own way from how we interpret our own, different parts of the world. I'm here in the Philippines, Anna's there in Brazil. And we also make a distinction between decolonial sustainability and indigenous sustainabilities. So we see decolonization as a specific function that hopefully leads to indigenous cultural sovereignty. So the reclamation of what was lost, essentially, as much as possible, as a way to facilitate planetary healing. And that itself is a basis for planetary regeneration. So that's our perspective of how essentially sustainability or regeneration is necessary to happen. And so in many ways, the collapse of modern Western civilization is part of that. This is what we see as happening on various scales from different parts of the global South. So from that perspective, we don't view decolonial sustainability as something that improves or evolves or radicalizes colonial sustainability. We see it as a rejection. So we see it as abolition, sort of exorcism, or in other ways to help it to destroy itself. It's already destroying itself, right? So therefore, some of the concepts that we consider as part of decolonial sustainability overlap a lot of what you've been mentioning in your review of different perspectives of what post-sustainability is, as you said. So I think it touches upon, in some ways, all three aspects, what you brought up. But I guess decolonial perspectives tend to have an approach which is on the basis of the harms that have been caused from centuries of colonization. And in particular, the ethnocidal and epistemicidal effects of colonization itself, which sort of like prevents, right? It's a barrier to returning to indigenous sustainabilities. And so therefore we see this work of decolonization that is sort of the in-between part that you mentioned. So that's how we see it. How do you view decolonization as part of what you've seen so far in post-sustainability?
Yeah, I feel that, and as I said, it was the first articulation of post-sustainability were in that line, but not so much since that. But I see that they, and as you described, they would naturally have so many coherence, I would hope. Of course, I'm not sure, was it Anna who said that maybe we should be careful what kind of intentions post-sustainability has, of course. But I would say that, for example, what I have been interested in, if, for example, the technological optimism is, if we take that away, we will have a totally new kind of view of plural ways of knowing and being sustainability expert or defining sustainability. And of course, what does that mean then? For example, in highly modernized society, what is plurality then? Is it some kind of transition movements, self-sufficiency, lost traditions like enlivening the agrarian skills or competencies or worldviews. Like it opens a whole new thing, but also I think it shows the hopelessness. Like if the hope of the sustainability, which means progressive, expansive technological sustainability, goes away, it's maybe something that it seems so dark, so to say, in contrast to enlightenment worldview. I think it's a cultural shock to even think about it. Like, I mean, seriously, in for example, I'm talking of my geographical context, but I also agree that that has been touched upon in this discussion that what sustainability is looks very different from where you are looking it in terms of geography and social cultural background and social economical context. So, well, I completely, Samantha, what you said, I completely agree with that. Like the going away of this expansive civilization. Post sustainability might mean some kind of baselessness of very kind epistemic crisis, worldview crisis, and complete lack of orientation, for example. And for example, in education, I have addressed this topic, and because in sustainable education, it's often it's framed as skills and competencies of sustainability. What are the needed skills? And some say it's too instrumental, and we should ask questions about how people actually change, how the existence of what it is to be human will change if these crises get more concrete and so forth. So it's not like skills of competencies, but learning to live with unsustainability, so to say.
As you said, the collapsing of worldviews and identities. This is something that we facilitate actually within our 5-month course, which is actually, we designed it to do that. And we thought it would be very irresponsible to do that in less than 5 months for people, because they experience this kind of like ripping out of the self and then finding that the layer of the self underneath that also needs to be ripped out. And that is happening for people over, like, the first course that we designed and folk who came out of that, it's been coming to 3 years now. They're still experiencing this ripping out of the self. Do you remember Mad Max? Like the original Mad Max movies?
I think I'm not sure if I saw the first one ever, but at least the second one.
So Thunderdome, the one with Tina Turner, you saw that?
Yeah,
That's the perfect one. Because you know how she says, like, two men enter, one man leaves, right? So I feel
yeah.
like this is exactly the identity piece that is happening for me around this thing that we are indoctrinated with, that we need to kind of confront and kind of kill in order to leave. But then what are you leaving into? You're leaving into chaos again, right? And so it's this continuous kind of being forced to choose of how do you behave in a world of crisis. And I think this itself is a great opportunity. For us, we see this as an infinite path of growth, that you must choose what kind of human you are. And I think this is what really confronts people with the difficulties of, okay, what am I willing to sacrifice? What am I willing to give up? What am I really going to stand for when push comes to shove? Because things are unmasking, right? So this is the term that we use a lot, especially now, where what they call the rise of fascism in the West, and for us it's always been fascist, so very difficult to call it a rise. But we definitely see it as a sort of like unmasking. So these opportunities, I think, around, as you said, identity crisis, we see it as very healthy. It's something that provides a lot of opportunity for growth. And this is, in a way, kind of like our main critique of degrowth as well, because we don't see that degrowth is necessary, yes, in consumption, but we see that it's very necessary to grow different perspectives and different realities. I also want to touch on the techno-optimism that you bring up. It's another dynamic that I think for us it's a very useful metaphor of the narcissistic ex-boyfriend who keeps coming back and saying, but just trust me, I'll fix it. I'll be better this time, and then of course, showing up with just like nothing and no preparation, and then the same cycle happens, and it's abusive and it's toxic and it's very hard to, get rid of. So this techno-optimism, that's the effect of it that we see happening in the global south, especially, when we're talking about the involvement of big philanthropy in imposing Western technology or Western approaches on the global south. I mean, there's so many examples of this. But when we're talking about the hopium, so Anna uses this word hopium, and it's not a it's it's in the Urban Dictionary, so it's not in the real dictionary, but it's referring specifically to hope as a narcotic, hope as a drug, right? Hope that is something that is enforced in order to get you to believe, like, the narcissistic ex-boyfriend, that change really is happening. So this techno-optimism comes to fulfill this goal of instilling hope in a population that otherwise would see, as you say, the future as very dark, very desolate, very desperate. And so the hope is a way to say, but we know what we're doing here. Just trust us. You don't have to rebel. You don't have to riot. You don't have to overthrow power structures. We know what we're doing. So it's very important that the hopium narrative is at the core of this messaging. And as you say, the one thing that is very kind of crucial to that messaging is the technology, because what else, as you said, what else do they have? What else is there to kind of like center the hopium on? And at the same time, the technology is very embedded in these fascist ideologies, right? Non-democratic ideologies. Regardless of how you view these things, these technologies are based upon business models of extraction. And then they get implemented as a form of progress, right? As though it's a philanthropic enterprise to begin with. And it's not. It's part of the extractive capitalist model that is based upon commodifying everything, right? Monitoring everything.
Actually, technology and sustainability maybe have the same, they are similar in the sense that in some sense you cannot argue against them because they are so universally good. If we view technology in this history of colonization and environmental history, it's just this kind of uneven exchange and extraction. And in some sense, post-sustainability maybe says, if we see it partly as internal discourse of global north, that okay, technology failed us, it didn't deliver, like it didn't do what it's supposed to do. But what insights or views would you have to this technology discourse? And like it feels that in sustainability science discourse, it's some way old fact that it cannot be sustainable, but it's so marginal, and only lately it seems to be that actually it isn't working. So is it then, I might guess it's old news for you in your perspective?
As you said, like the ecological modernization did not deliver what sustainability promised, more technologies haven't solved the problem so far. So it is a bit of that dynamic of willful blindness, or this toxic dynamic of wanting the narcotic to kind of alleviate the discomfort and the uncertainty, I think, that I think relates so much with what you were saying around the worldview crisis, because it's like so much of our identities is attached to what we do, our profession, what we believe in, you know, especially when these things involve some sort of purpose, like sustainability. It's like, and then when you are confronted with this idea that it's not working, there is a deep identity discomfort that comes with that, you know, and the uncertainty. And I think then people try, either they will go through the pathway that Samantha was mentioning of like reaping the self in a way, and going to this pathway of growth that is deeply discomfortable and that is very difficult. Or the more comfortable thing is to try to regain some sense of control through the things that are at disposal. So I think one way to do that is with technology, or with these frameworks that are existing that can work only if we improve them a little bit, or if we fix some things. I think that is one pathway. But something that I have been also observing, that the other pathway to do that, to kind of go through this comfort pathway, or trying to attach yourself to something that bring in a little bit more of sense of control and certainty, is this inclusion of non-hegemonic views into the sustainability discourse. So going to the indigenous perspectives or indigenous ways of sustainability. And I think there is a big trap there of co-optation, because in response to the failures of the dominant sustainability, there is this rush to borrow indigenous practices and spiritual frameworks without understanding their cultural context, and without confronting and healing one's own disconnection from heritage and land. Like there is a hole there that then is filled through this very problematic appropriation and co-optation that further entrench these colonial relations and turn indigenous wisdom into kind of commodity. So I think there is a thing there around trying to find quick fixes to escape from this crisis, to engage in the deeply uncomfortable work of reckoning with complicity in the problem, addressing the confusion, and as Samantha was saying, like supporting indigenous sovereignty instead of just appropriating indigenous lifeways into the discourse. So these are some of the kind of ways that I see, like the easy ways out that further create more problems. It's like you are putting out a fire somewhere, but then you are creating other fires through that. And I see technology as one of these kind of narcotics or easy ways out that people kind of attach themselves to.
Yeah, it's a interesting point to make, that like technology and then some kind of maybe indigenous or traditional sustainability appropriation are maybe like two easy ways out. And then I was thinking maybe, and it would maybe be my next question to you, that what then would be like a proper positionality or approach there? Because as we talked, like techno optimism or this hopium will, like, it depoliticizes, so there is no need to change if we believe in techno fix, and it's always like a win-win situation in these visions of technological sustainability, so no one will lose. But then like to my mind came to this articulation in one post-sustainability text, that we should keep studying this situation of sustaining the unsustainable. So would it then mean that, for example, sustainability experts or scholars should not jump into some technofix or cultural appropriation, but merely to report their, I don't know, if we call it a dead end of thinking rationally about uh, sustainability. And that reminds me of this term of a person as a litmus test that was mentioned by philosopher Timothy Morton, that we are like the litmus test in chemistry that are put in some kind of environment and we change because of it. Then, for example, any sustainability expert could think that they are not like some kind of rational fortress, and they don't need to be in some sense, but to report what is happening between them and the culture and how they are constructed by that exchange. And I would think it might be then some kind of honest work, I don't know, just thinking out loud to have that kind of role in that, because I think there is also lots of like empirical studies that has to do with psychology also, that for example people in affluent countries or having access to lots of fossil fuel energy or money, for example, they simply affect who we think we are and what we think we know. These kind of circumstances affect our thinking, and I think it, yeah, just that also researchers and scientists, I think they cannot escape that. So maybe then staying in and, I don't know, reporting that in a, I would say, critical and honest fashion. I don't know. How does this sound to you? And my approach to this is more like philosophical or academic, but in the practice or from your point of view, how do you deal and work with these issues?
I think this is something that we saw as very necessary to address when we entered into this area of, regeneration practitioners. And then you see the same patterns, like what you notice on on the level of academic discourse, we notice in terms of like how people are behaving and the ways that they impose their worldviews onto, what regenerative futures are supposed to mean without ever questioning. So this is the kind of like basic cognitive dissonance that we started seeing the pattern without ever questioning how we got here, without understanding, okay, so how did we become unsustainable? Because like we were not always unsustainable. So what is your view on how that happened? This is never part of the conversation. So this fundamental lack of anchoring, right, is what leads to all of this kind of fantastical thinking, magical thinking that then breeds this, but we need to align with like capitalism. Otherwise, it's very difficult to do things quickly, right? Because they're always looking for urgency, urgency, urgency. And so this is the reason why we started to try to design experiences that can help people address this in a way that leads to them realizing that they need to go through that door of, identity crisis after identity crisis. They need to choose to do that on their own. Because if they truly want to commit to a regenerated planet, there's a lot of fundamental things that need to be shed, as you were saying. So for us, the way that we curate these spaces, it's very intentional. We don't want, it's almost like, creating a temple environment where you need to commit to being a monk or a nun for like a set period of time. And there are rules. right? You need to be able to have some discipline. You need to be able to reflect and ask why you are trained in this way and what is healthy or what is toxic about it. And to also go into this little nuances of basically like what we call meta learning, or understanding how you learn or what your barriers are to learning. And when people start to develop the skill set, it starts to accelerate, right? And so then it goes to this point of like, I see, it's almost like we're showing them where the doorknob is, but they're the only ones who can like turn the knob and open and then choose to step through. So in our experience of trying to facilitate that entire, there's obviously many different ways that people tend to go, different reactions that people have. And we're not necessarily trying to get them to the same place. We're trying to get them to realize that this is a door that you can open. And what happens after is kind of like freedom. Freedom from the weight of this agenda, that they realize that it's not helpful. It's not what they want to be pawns for, and it's not something that they see as actually workable once they look at, as Anna was saying, the realities of how these mechanisms of civilization, of modern Western civilization, have been imposed on the rest of the world for centuries. So I think this, for us, is kind of what we're talking about with growth and how people look for those so-called solutions in external fields rather than internal personal and identity worldview type approaches, or what is sometimes called, inner sustainability or inner regeneration. But we don't see it as an internal thing at all. We see it as a cultural work, essentially. And this is not something that we see many others talking about or doing. And so in the last 5 years, when we have been doing this, we're very strict about how we curate those spaces. Not everybody is ready, we know that. And not everybody, who thinks they're ready, and we think they're ready, but somewhere along that process, it's very obvious that, something's not working or something's very unhealthy. It can also lead to people getting trapped into basically like clinical depression and not being able to move out of that. So there are dangers with that, obviously. And we try to, we have learned from making some mistakes, how to try to avoid that as much as possible. So, we've developed different techniques to try to facilitate essentially this process within this 5-month limitation, for example. But, this is for a select few group of people who they all come out saying that they've been completely transformed. They have a completely different worldview from how they arrived. And usually you have people quitting their jobs halfway, or if they're in charge of a business strategy, they would start to, rewrite the whole thing. And they start to interact with their own worlds, especially in the global north, in their own ways. But then I think what's important to say is that this is not only work that needs to be done in the global north, because coloniality exists everywhere. It's, I think, more relevant in the global north in terms of how those power structures manifest and the role or the positionality of one particular person, for example, in a business school teaching sustainability, who decided to attend our course, and then they have this positionality, right? So they have a certain way to affect how they change, let's say, education of sustainability. So I don't know, this is our approach. I think we have a very effective way of doing that, very successful way. But I think we're definitely focused not on the quantity, but more on the quality of the experience. And I think we try as much as possible to make the transformation permanent. And that means people need to choose for themselves. It needs to be a choice that is coming out of their own agency. And as you said, how to foster that is another question to begin with.
Wow, thank you, Samantha. And yeah, so that brings to my mind like one of the categories in my article, like the post-sustainability as existential, like anxiety. That literature, there is not so much that yet, but I think that's exactly some understanding what is maybe the like the gap, the research gap or knowledge gap in that sense. Because, for example, if my studies started from education, then the question is not only how young people can be educated, but for example, researchers or experts who come to realize uh, some of these post-sustainable or decolonial topics, for example, who guarantees that they can, in their personal growth, adopt this understanding? They are, in the sense, on their own. And as we know, adult people often have very good strategies to legitimize who they are and what they do. And as they grow older, they are maybe even more focused in their own self justification, so to say. So that's exactly what I was thinking. It was not addressed in the article, but when researchers and experts start to think these things, what's happening inside them is not shown in the research article pages often, like almost never, but it's happening somewhere else. So I think then you are working then in that dimension, internal dimension.
This is such an interesting conversation, and as Samantha said, we could be here for hours because I think there are so many dimensions of this. It's not just the industry, it's not just the mechanisms, the narratives, it's also the internalization of that as individuals. So we used to say that there's no one right way to decolonize. There is context and there is possibility. So we also say that we don't see ourselves as educators. Like, we're not telling you what to do or how. We are not using frameworks. We are not using like clear steps. Our approach is more around supporting people in interrogating the systems around them and building critical thinking, critical feeling, and building the skills to be able to intervene in the systems they are in. So to kind of change that expectation that of reliance on an authority figure to tell you what to do, or to have some certainties in you just follow these steps or this framework and then you will be decolonizing, when we know it's not that simple. And it also involves, it's not only an intellectualization that you can make, but you need to practice that in your life. So it involves a lot of personal spheres as well. And I think that is what brings agency. It's kind of also supporting people to unlearn the way that they are used to learn and learn differently, deeply embedded in their own contexts and an agency. So as a process itself, it's not just being able to see the system and plan interventions, but also go through the process of peeling the layers of yourself to see what's under it.
Oh, thank you. And so many thoughts, but yeah, I think post sustainability means lots of uncertainty and unknowing. But maybe when discussing it, we should remember that one way that it might turn out, and hopefully not, that it's just the this kind of protectionist resilience thinking, and try to find more plural ways and that kind of openings from that, and see it as an opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you so much for today. And of course, we'll be in touch. So hopefully we can also continue the conversation in some way. Yeah, it's really great to meet you.
You too, Samantha, and thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you, Pasi. Sustainability as a discourse has been around for decades. So why hasn't it led to radical transformation? What has sustainability as an industry actually achieved in terms of what it claims to be doing? For all the talk of change, justice, and regeneration, it mostly preserved the status quo and became an empty signifier, full of buzzwords but hollow in action. What we have seen is the continued promotion of colonial hegemony's outdated, already failed, yet loudly repackaged fantasies of Western environmentalism and white sustainability. Collapse has been framed as an opportunity for the same dominant actors to innovate, profit, and save the world. Not to take accountability, but to cling to relevance, power, and narrative control. This logic just keeps a necrotic system on life support, fatal yet profitable. If the system isn't working, why do we keep investing in it? What's behind the dissociation? Institutions and individuals within the sustainability industry play their roles in highly coordinated and consistent ways, shaped by powerful and well-financed systems that manipulate fear. Many professionals can sense that the solutions aren't solving, but when you've spent years building a career around driving purpose, it's hard to look in the mirror and ask, was it all for nothing? That kind of questioning doesn't just threaten your work, it threatens your identity. Because when your sense of worth is tied to external validation, to job titles and impact tags, how do you walk away from the very system that defines that value? So people stay. They keep performing, not because they don't care, but because the cost of stepping away feels unbearable. They reinforce coloniality to protect comfort, maintain social position, and avoid retaliation even when they know something is wrong. When these patterns repeat across the entire industry, we are no longer just talking about individuals. We are looking at a culture-wide narcissism, a system that cannot imagine itself obsolete. Takkinen found three big themes of post-sustainability. One is that sustainability has failed. And with that comes a fear of being wrong. The fear of being wrong becomes a fear of being nothing. Two is that the future looks bleak, revealing a fear for the survival of Western civilization itself. The fear of the unknown fuels a hunger for safety, and Sustainability Inc. sells that safety. Salaries, healthcare, predictability, LinkedIn endorsements. Even when the work feels hollow, the void beyond it feels worse. Three is that we are suspended between a failed present and an impossible future. And that tension triggers a fear of real structural transformation. because structural transformation ignites a fear of giving up the comforts the system provides, even if those comforts come at a violent cost. The sustainability industry justifies itself through glossy metrics and moral performance, but beneath the surface, it's complicit in the very systems accelerating planetary systems collapse. So, is post-sustainability just sustainability on steroids? Or can it be something else entirely? If sustainability has failed, we don't need to double down. We need the maturity to admit mistakes, seek justice, and offer reparations. If collapse feels inevitable, maybe we stop trying to prevent it and start learning how to hold it. Degrowth, managing collapse, care, supporting other modes of survival. If we are truly between stories, then we need to learn, unlearn, and build new governance structures on all levels. Again, requiring pausing, reflecting, and growing through right relationship and investing in indigenous sovereignty. We hope this video helped clarify why sustainability as it currently operates is not a solution but a symptom. And maybe opened up space to wonder what else might be possible. What might live on the other side of sustainability? What do you take away from this? What has become clearer or harder to ignore? What are you curious about? What are you noticing about current sustainability narratives? And what does post-sustainability mean to you? Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.